Baldilocks arrived alone at Malaga Airport late on the 23rd of December and got onto the bus to the centre of Torremolinos. "Welcome aboard," said the bird driving. "I'm Gary, and these are Terry and Barry." The birds were off for Christmas, so they suggested they'll stay with Baldilocks. Nobody saw a problem with this. Baldilocks and the birds unpacked in the apartment, the uniforms came off, the Christmas clothes came out, and by the end of the evening, it already felt like they'd been living there for years. Baldilocks took the birds to a restaurant for goat leg. It was calm, it was polite. Afterwards, they decided to have one drink. On the way back, Baldilocks spotted a weed social club. They went in. They did not come out for 2 hours. Then, as they made the way home, they sang Bob Marley down the street. Back at the hotel, they were still feeling the effects of the weed social club. Without any discussion at all, Baldilocks and the birds snuggled up, and they cuddled in bed until the morning. The morning after was not peaceful. A bird had pooed in the bed. Baldilocks was covered in what suspiciously looked like chocolate. He didn't investigate any further. Later that morning, Baldilocks' scooter arrived. It was red. It had a basket, and from that moment on, nobody walked anywhere ever again. Tony and Sophie arrived at Malaga Airport to find their transfer cancelled. Oh dear. Tony rang Baldilocks. Baldilocks rode to the airport on his mobility scooter with a solution. Tony went in the basket. Tony and Baldilocks went back on the mobility scooter. Sophie had to get the bus. But at least Baldilocks gave her €2 for the journey. She was not impressed. Everyone finally arrived at Ecuador Park. The birds were settled, Tony was relaxed. Sophie realised this holiday was already out of control. Tony showed Sophie their apartment. Sophie unpacked. Tony apologised. Then Tony suggested going to Lidl. This did not help. Tony and Sophie went to Lidl for food. Unbelievably, they met one of the bears. He was very enthusiastic about cucumbers. Sophie did not enjoy this. They finally reached the checkout. The bear was in front of them and bought a cucumber and 2 tubs of Vaseline. Sophie had questions. The bear did not help. The bear walked back with Tony and Sophie. He had plans involving a cucumber, some Vaseline and Baldilocks. Sophie did not approve. Tony and Sophie made it back to the hotel. The bear went to Baldilocks' room. Sophie had questions. Tony had no answers. Sophie said, "What's the deal with the bear wanting to play some cucumber game with the Vaseline in our hotel room later?" Tony replied, "It's Spain." Sophie confronted Baldilocks in his apartment. The bears nibbled, fiddled and dribbled. Sophie had questions. Baldilocks had beer. Sophie said, "I am not having bears in our hotel room with cucumbers and Vaseline, especially slippery ones." Sophie made her position very clear. No bears, no games, no cucumbers. Back in Tony and Sophie's room, Sophie still had questions. Tony said, "Let's go and see John in Brown's Bar." Sophie sighed, and then said, "I guess the bears are coming, and obviously Paul. I still don't understand why Paul has bears and why they want to play games with cucumbers." In fact, nobody really understood the cucumber situation. Brown's Bar felt familiar. John poured the drinks. The bears behaved perfectly. Sophie did not trust this at all. The drinks moved outside. The bears drank like bears. Baldilocks bought another round. Sophie knew exactly where this was heading. 1 drink became 3. 3 became an idea. Sophie knew it was already too late. The whole gang went to a drag queen bar. The bears passed over the cucumber for the DJ to use as a microphone. They eventually made it back to the hotel. Everyone was tired, everyone was drunk, except Sophie. The bears wanted to play a game of hide the sausage roll. Tony and Sophie got upstairs and Sophie slammed the door in Tony's face. Then one of the bears invited him into their room. Maybe he could help them find the sausage roll. Tony entered the room and one of the bears says, "Do you think you know where the sausage roll is now?" Tony said, "Of course I do, it's in the bathroom." From bed, Baldilocks cleared his throat. "For the record," he said calmly, "I was doing some late-night exercises before you came in. That explains the rope. Very therapeutic." Tony thought he'd leave the birds and Baldilocks to have fun with their games and went back to Sophie. She was very mad. Everybody decided to get some sleep. Tomorrow was Christmas Day morning, and nobody had any idea what it might bring. Tony and Sophie got up at 10 a.m. The birds had already let themselves into their apartment. They'd made breakfast for them, and they were singing,
"We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas."
The birds left. Sophie took a shower, and Tony decided to spend some time feeding the parrots. Tony and Sophie headed outside. To their surprise, Baldilocks and the three birds presented them with a nativity play. They all headed to Brown's Bar to wish John a Merry Christmas and were greeted with a glass of champagne and crackers with cheese as a Christmas treat. After Brown's Bar, the group set off for Christmas lunch. Nobody was entirely sure who had booked it. The group settled down for food, but one of the birds violently broke wind. Sophie was having a hard time breathing whilst everybody laughed out loud. The group then went for a walk on the beachfront after their meal and took with them a bottle of wine. Disaster then struck when a parrot struck Baldilocks' hat. With aching legs, he asked one of the birds to fetch his mobility scooter. The bear returned with the scooter now fully festive. Tony, clearly feeling the wine, climbed into the basket without hesitation. Sophie stared on in complete disbelief. The group started talking to the cats in the cat colony. A little black one jumped into the basket with Tony and wanted to come along for the ride. The group arrived back at Brown's Bar and they could feel the wine, apart from Sophie, who now needed a drink because everybody else was falling asleep. John saw most of the group asleep, so decided to wake them up with a few bottles of lovely and healthy Buckfast. Sophie didn't understand why the group seemed so happy. Then, they all had to head back to the hotel because the birds started to feel unwell. Tony decided the solution to everything was green spinach burgers. Nobody was convinced, especially Sophie. One of the birds thought he could add to the flavour of the burgers. He found some Scherstroming in his pocket and decided to open it, and instantly realised he had made a terrible mistake. Tony, absolutely knackered, said to Sophie, "Let's have a day on our own tomorrow," and she replied, "Okay," with a smile on her face. After the stressful day, Tony and Sophie went to bed. They were about to finally fall asleep and one of the birds burst into the room with bad news. "Come quickly! Baldilocks is in trouble," he said. They went into the room and it was a nightmare. The little bird said, "Baldilocks was trying to put a disco ball on the ceiling but fell onto the broom we were playing a game with. What can we do? We think it's stuck." Tony said, "I'll call 061, it's the number of the ambulance here." Sophie said, "Yes, I'll wait outside for them to turn up, but do you know, it's really weird that there isn't a ladder or disco ball in this room." The ambulance arrived to take Baldilocks to hospital for the removal of his foreign object. The whole gang made the way to the hospital, while the birds was travelling in the ambulance with Baldilocks. One of the doctors spoke with Tony and Sophie. He said, "We'll have to get you all in one of our helicopters and take you to University Hospital Air, as they have special correctoral services. We don't have the tools here, as Baldilocks has a nurse, not an arse." With one last wave from the birds and the cat, Baldilocks, Tony and Sophie headed back to the UK for emergency surgery, proving that some holidays really do go too far. The group finally got out of the hospital as Baldilocks had had his surgery and they all needed to make their way home. Baldilocks says, "Same time, same place next year." Have a wonderful Christmas from the cast of Baldilocks and the three bus driver birds.